When our daughter Ellen was little, we were reading the book The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe together. This book by C.S. Lewis. And if you know the book, you know that the lion is Aslan. And in this book, there's a young boy who essentially is a traitor. He colludes with the enemy, and so his life is forfeited. And Aslan, who is the son of the emperor over the sea, Aslan, who is the great lion, the king of Narnia, volunteers to give his own life in place of the life of this traitor. And so the White Witch, who is the evil pretender to the throne, is about to kill him. And so we're at that point in the book where they're strapping Aslan onto this table, and it's a little scary. And my daughter Ellen says to me, "I don't want to read anymore." I said, "But Ellen, it's going to be okay, really. It turns out all right." "No, I don't want to read." Close the book. And then the following weekend, Ellen goes and spends the night with a friend. And it turns out that her friend and her friend's dad are reading The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. But they're farther along. And so she hears them read the last part of the book and finds out that Aslan is killed, but he comes back to life. And the White Witch is defeated, and everything turns out well. And so the next day, as we're getting ready for bed, she says, "We can read the book now." Knowing the end of the story sometimes helps us to get through those scary parts, those anxious parts, those boring parts. Knowing the end of the story can be a really good thing. We have been talking about knowing the end of the story helps us get through those times that are painful, those times that are dull, those times that are anxious. We look at the world around us and the things that are going on. We look at our own lives and the troubles that we deal with. Sometimes we want to just close the book. But because we know the end of the story, we have courage and perseverance to get through the tough parts. As an Easter people, we know the end of the story, and that gives us courage. It gives us perseverance. But more than that, have you ever heard the phrase, "It's not the destination, but the journey"? You ever thought about how silly that actually is? Because if there is no destination, there's no journey. If there's no destination, you're not on a journey, you're just out stumbling around aimlessly. It's not an either-or thing. Knowing the destination, knowing where we're going, is what makes the journey worthwhile. Knowing the destination gives us purpose, gives us focus, and helps us prepare for where we're going. It is because, as an Easter people, we know the end of the story, we know the destination, that we can appreciate this journey we're on for all it's worth. It is the destination and the journey. And as an Easter people who know the end of the story, we know that and can fully live in this part of the journey that we're on right now. Easter people know the end of the story, and it's because we're given it. We are given the end of the story in this passage that we read today. We know where we're going because John tells us. He tells us he was brought to this mountain and he sees the holy city, the New Jerusalem, coming down out of heaven from God. And right there, that tells us something really important that we sometimes miss. The end of the story is not us going somewhere. It's not us floating off to some, Elysian fields or something. The end of the story is about the holy city coming here. It is about heaven coming here on earth. The New Jerusalem comes out of heaven to earth. Where we're heading is for where heaven and earth meet, where heaven breaks into earth. And it is literally then heaven on earth. And that is why John goes on to say that there is no temple in the city. Because God and the Lamb are right there. Temples are where we go to get a glimpse of heaven. To get that heavenly vision, but then heaven will be here with us. God and the Lamb will be right there all the time. And we're told that in this vision of where we're going, that we won't need the light of the moon or the sun because God himself will be our light and the Lamb will be the Lamb. I find that fascinating. Light needs something to carry it, something to bear it. And the lamp that bears the light of God to us is the Lamb. It's Jesus Christ. Psalm 119 tells us that. It says, thy word is a lamp to our feet. And Jesus Christ is the word of God, the lamp to our feet. And at that time then, we will be bathed in the light of God. Being bathed in the light of God means that we will no longer struggle with ignorance. We will no longer stumble over things we did not see. There will be no more shadows in our lives. The light of God will be there all the time. It goes on to tell us that the nations of the earth will be guided by that light. No longer will governments, no longer will social systems be self-serving, but they will be guided by God's will. No longer will governments oppress the people. No longer will the rich oppress the poor. No longer will the powerful oppress the weak. But all will be aligned with God's intentions, following God's light. But notice that means there are still nations, there are still kingdoms. That human systems, human structures are still there. But now they serve God fully. As we read along in this passage, it's fascinating that we read about this New Jerusalem and we may realize that we know this place. Did any of you ever see the old Planet of the Apes movie, the original one with Charlton Heston? In that movie, Charlton Heston is this astronaut who goes off into space and something goes wrong and he crash lands on this planet. And this planet has apes who can speak and they're in charge. They're the ones who control things. And humans are like beasts. And they're kept in cages and they do menial tasks. They're kind of barbaric. And this, the movie goes on to show this being overcome, and Charlton Heston, who can speak, amazes all the apes who didn't think humans could do that. And then eventually he and this woman escape from captivity, and they're riding off along the beach on a horse. And out of the corner of his eye, he sees this strange structure. And he goes over closer and he realizes that this strange structure, it's the Statue of Liberty. And suddenly, in a flash, he realizes where he is. He realizes that he is on earth. In fact, he's in America. Seeing that Statue of Liberty lets him know where it is that he is. He recognizes the place now. Now, in the movie, that's kind of a bad thing. Humans have kind of blown it. But in this vision here, we see the same kind of thing. We read along and we see this river flowing down the streets in the middle of the city, and And we read that on each side of the river stood the tree of life. You say, the tree of life, I recognize that. It's right at the beginning. All the way back in Genesis in chapter 2. There in the Garden of Eden, in the center of the garden, was the tree of life. And we realize that this must be the same place. That this heavenly vision of Jerusalem coming down out of heaven to earth is the Garden of Eden, as it was intended to be. It is the Garden of Eden in which human work of building and planning, of art and engineering has come to fruition, so that the garden that we were placed in, that we were meant to tend, meant to be stewards of, that garden has become the Garden City. It's become what it was supposed to be. And God has taken all of our failings, all of our mistakes, all the hard, terrible things in life, and He still brought it to fruition. Brought us to where we were supposed to be from the very beginning. And we realize that the end of the story and the beginning of the story are in the same place. And as we read this and we think about what is off in the distance for us, what the end of the story is, and that paradise garden that we are going to be in, we may find ourselves being concerned. It's like, well, what are we going to do? I mean, I don't know anybody, even people who love harp, I don't know anybody who wants to sit around and play harp all day long, forever and ever. There was an article in Time magazine a couple of years ago about how an understanding of heaven can help make earth better. And somebody wrote in and said, I think heaven's going to be boring. I was reading about a man named Carl the other day. And Pastor Jack Hayford, was Carl's pastor, was visiting Carl in the hospital as Carl lay dying. And Carl had spent his career as a lighting director. He was the head lighting director for CBS. And the pastor, Jack asked him, he says, so Carl, how are you feeling? And Carl says, I spent my whole life as a lighting director. I mean, the whole point of what I do is taking different lights and making sure that the angles and the intensities are right and blending the light together to give the right effects. He said, Pastor Jack, last night, Jesus spoke to me. He said, Carl, how would you like to direct a sunset? Heaven, or the heavenly Jerusalem, the heaven on earth, is not going to be a boring, tedious place where we have nothing to do, but a place where we are able to fulfill who we truly were created to be. To use all that God has made us, but to use it for God's glory. In the last book of the Chronicles of Narnia, a book called The Last Battle, Lewis writes about what that might be like. In The Last Battle, Narnia has kind of come apart at the seams, and yet Aslan has led the children and the animals and the beasts into a new Narnia. A Narnia that is more Narnia-ish than the original Narnia. It's more real, more true. And Lewis ends the whole series this way. He said, as Aslan spoke, he no longer looked to them like a lion. But the things that began to happen after that were so great and beautiful that I cannot write them. And for us, this is the end of all the stories, and we can most truly say that they all lived happily ever after. But for them, it was only the beginning of the real story. All their life in this world and all their adventures in Narnia had only been the cover and the title page. Now, at last, they were beginning chapter 1 of the great story, which no one on earth has read, which goes on forever, in which every chapter is better than the one before. Brothers and sisters, as an Easter people, we know the end of the story. And we also know that the end of the story is just the beginning of the real story. The real story where we will see God face to face, and everything we are will be used as it was intended to be